Late at night, in the dimly lit emergency room, drive. Marcus Reed rubbed his eyes, trying to fight off the fatigue of an endless shift. The faint hum of medical equipment and the occasional beep of heart monitors filled the air. He was halfway through signing patient reports when the sharp wail of an ambulance siren pierced the quiet. Moments later, the sliding doors burst open and a rush of cold night air swept in, carrying with it the scent of rain and gasoline. 2 paramedics stormed in, their uniforms damp, pushing a gurney with a young pregnant woman strapped down. Her skin was ghostly pale, her eyelids fluttering weakly, oxygen tubes taped to her face, and IV lines hastily secured. One paramedic's voice cracked under pressure, BPs crashing, fetal heart rate unstable. Marcus didn't waste a single second. He tossed the clipboard aside and was already moving toward her, his mind shifting into full emergency mode. "Get her to Trauma 1. He commanded, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Nurses scrambled to clear the path, pulling equipment closer. Marcus jogged alongside the gurney, eyes scanning the woman's vitals and reading her condition at a glance: internal bleeding likely, severe distress, both lives on the edge. He placed a firm hand on her wrist, feeling the faint, rapid pulse, and met her half-conscious gaze for just a second. There was fear there, and desperation. Inside the trauma room, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Monitors flickered, the rhythmic beeping uneven and foreboding. Marcus was already gloving up, barking orders for blood transfusions, oxygen flow adjustments, and prepping for possible surgery. The woman's breathing grew more labored, her chest rising in shallow gasps. "We're losing her," one paramedic said in a low, grim tone. Marcus didn't look up, he couldn't afford to. His focus narrowed to one truth. Right now, this woman and her unborn child had only one chance, and he was it. In the operating room, the fluorescent lights blazed down, casting a stark brightness over the sterile space. The young woman lay on the table, her face almost as white as the sheets beneath her, her breathing shallow and uneven. Marcus stood at her side, already in surgical scrubs, his gloved hands poised and ready. A nurse called out the latest vitals, and each number sent another jolt of urgency through the room: blood pressure dropping, oxygen levels falling, fetal heart rate dangerously low. The steady beeping of the monitors turned into sharp, frantic alarms that seemed to echo in everyone's chest. "Scalpel," Marcus ordered, his voice steady but firm. The instrument landed in his palm without hesitation. With practiced precision, he made the incision, the air thick with tension. The nurses moved quickly, anticipating his needs: suction, clamps, gauze, each tool passed with silent efficiency. A bead of sweat rolled down Marcus's temple, but he didn't wipe it away. There was no time. The baby's heartbeat on the monitor slowed further, the soft thump-thump growing weaker with every passing second. "Come on, stay with me," Marcus muttered under his breath, his eyes locked on his work. He could feel the weight of 2 lives pressing on his shoulders, the kind of pressure that could crush a lesser man. He freed the baby with swift but careful movements, and for a heart-stopping moment, there was only silence. Then, the sound everyone had been waiting for: a loud, strong newborn cry that cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through a storm. A wave of relief swept the room, some of the staff exhaling audibly, but Marcus didn't pause. "Keep the baby warm, monitor vitals," he instructed, already turning his full attention back to the mother. She was still bleeding heavily, her body weakening by the second. He worked quickly to find the source, clamping vessels and stitching torn tissue with the kind of speed that came only from years of experience. His jaw was tight, his breathing controlled, every movement deliberate. The rest of the room seemed to fade away. There was only him, the woman, and the fight to keep her heart beating. Hours later, the chaos of the night had faded into a tense stillness. In the dim recovery room, the woman lay beneath crisp white sheets, a soft beeping from the monitor confirming her heart was steady again. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with a warmer glow from a single wall lamp, casting long shadows across the room. Marcus stood by her bedside, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. His scrubs were wrinkled, his hair slightly damp from the heat and effort of the surgery, but his focus remained on her vitals. Every steady rise and fall of her chest felt like a quiet victory. The door suddenly swung open, breaking the silence. Heavy footsteps echoed against the polished floor, followed by the unmistakable presence of authority. A tall man in an expensive navy suit strode in, flanked by 2 suited security officers who scanned the room instantly. The man's tie was loosened, his eyes sharp but filled with barely contained panic. He went straight to the bed, his hand hovering over the woman's arm before he finally let it rest there, his shoulders sagging in relief. "You saved my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off by the statement. "Your wife?" he asked, still unsure if he'd heard correctly. The man turned toward him fully, and in that moment, Marcus recognized him, not from any personal meeting, but from countless news broadcasts and city billboards. "I'm Mayor Jonathan Hayes," the man confirmed, his tone both grateful and grave. "She means everything to me." For a brief moment, the room seemed to pause. Marcus felt the weight of what had just been revealed settle over him. He had been so consumed with saving her life that he hadn't once thought to ask her name or status. To him, she had been simply a patient in need, nothing more, nothing less. But now, as the mayor stood before him with gratitude in his eyes, Marcus realized the city's most powerful man had just trusted him with its most precious secret. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through the blinds of the private hospital room, casting warm stripes across the bed. The young woman was awake now, her cheeks no longer pale but carrying a gentle blush of life. She cradled a tiny newborn in her arms, the baby wrapped snugly in a pastel blanket, its small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The room smelled faintly of fresh flowers, bouquets that had been delivered earlier and now lined the windowsill. The quiet was peaceful, broken only by the baby's occasional soft noises. Marcus stepped in quietly, a chart in hand, intending only to check her vitals and give her space to rest. But when she looked up and their eyes met, she gave him a trembling smile. "You didn't know who I was," she began, her voice soft but filled with emotion, "but you fought for me like I was the most important person in the world." She glanced down at her baby, her arms tightening protectively. "Because of you, I get to hold my child today." Before Marcus could respond, Mayor Hayes, now without the entourage, stepped forward from where he'd been standing silently by the window. He extended his hand, gripping Marcus's firmly. "Doctor," he said, his tone low but resonant, "you didn't just save my wife, you saved my family. I can never repay you for that." There was no formality in his voice now, only raw sincerity. Word of the night's events had already begun to ripple beyond the hospital walls. Reporters had gathered outside, and the city was buzzing with the story of the humble doctor who had risked everything to save the mayor's wife. Yet as Marcus left the room, walking past the flowers, the security, and the whispered thanks from staff, none of that mattered to him. Recognition had never been the goal. For him, it was, and always would be, about one simple truth: every life was worth saving, no matter whose it was.